When this old lady passed away, her kids wrote a brutal obituary. But before we start, please give the video a like and make sure to subscribe to Wonderbot and hit the bell so you'll never miss any uploads from us. Sybil Hicks' children knew a normal obituary wouldn't suffice for their mom. So when the matriarch passed away at the age of 81, they ditched the idea of a somber goodbye. Instead, they wrote an obituary that was equal parts brash, bold, funny, and heart-wrenching. And they weren't the only ones who appreciated her non-traditional send-off. The internet loved it too. Clearly, Sybil had a sense of humor, but her 5 children and husband Ron would remember her for much more than that. For one thing, she had devoted her life to helping others. Professionally, she'd worked as a nurse and also helped Ron run a school bus company. In her spare time, she taught sewing classes and collected bottles to raise money for charity. However, Sybil had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's several years prior to her passing, and according to the CBC, it had been a long time since they could communicate with their mother as they'd once knew her. So that's precisely where her one-of-a-kind obituary came in. Sybil's family wanted one last chance to have a real and real funny conversation with their mom. We'll return to Sybil's family's epic send-off later, but first let's learn a little bit more about this remarkable woman. She collected her diploma with honors from Waterdown High School in Ontario, Canada, and scrolled across the stage in glistening saddle shoes. But that wasn't the end of her time in academia. In 1957, she graduated alongside that year's class of aspiring medical professionals at the Hamilton General Hospital School of Nursing. However, 15 years later, life looked completely different for Sybil. By that time, she'd married her husband Ron, and the pair had welcomed 5 children, the 5 Bs as they referred to them. They had their eldest son Bob, then Brian, then daughters Brenda and Barbara, and then finally their youngest, Bruce. In 1972, the Hicks family all packed into their car and moved in pursuit of a new life in Baysville, Ontario. Ron's new post had him in charge of a school bus company in the area, and Sybil helped him run it. She also worked as a nurse and maintained a slew of hobbies too. For one thing, Sybil loved to garden, and she'd mastered sewing to the point that she'd decided to teach the craft to others. The mom also stitched together vests for the Baysville chapter of the Lions Club, a community service organization with more than 1.4 million members worldwide. Much like her profession and roster of activities, Sybil's kids couldn't say enough about how caring their mother was. Brian, the second oldest, and the 5 Hicks kids described their mother quite simply to the CBC in 2019. He said, "She was a kind-hearted person, always had a smile." This meant that Sybil and Ron's abode had an open-door policy. Brian went on to say, "The home was always welcome to their friends, as well as all of our friends as kids. Every one of our friends just didn't want to leave. They'd end up overnight or for the weekend because they enjoyed our family dynamic." But Sybil was not a one-note kind of lady. She juxtaposed her deeply caring nature with a quick sense of humor and wit. As one example, the nurse had a nickname for herself, which she used when she wanted her words delivered with extra oomph. Brian said she often referred to herself as Mrs. Ron Hicks. As Mrs. Ron Hicks, Sybil's words carried more weight. Brian went on, her son explained to CBC that she used the nickname when she wanted to be forceful and make a point and kind of get on a bit of a soapbox. She often used that term when she had an opinion about things. As it turned out, Sybil, the kind-hearted, gentle nurse, had staunch opinions on a lot of topics. She had no trouble holding her own when Ron would initiate a bit of a banter between them either. In fact, she had a nickname for him that she deployed in this specific circumstance: horse's ass. Brian explained, "That's a term Sybil used an awful lot, and I'll give you an example. You know, often when she would say something loud and with authority, my father Ron lovingly said to her, 'Sybil, can I help you down?' But his inquisition was not a genuine one, it was the setup of a joke." So Brian explained that Sybil would kind of look at Ron quizzically, and she would say, "What do you mean?" As he recalled it, Ron would respond, "Well, I can help you get down off that soapbox if you'd like." That's precisely when the Hicks family matriarch would deploy her little nickname. Brian joked, so that's sort of how that term of endearment came about. Over time, the Hicks family grew to encompass Sybil, Ron, their 5 children, and 13 grandchildren. Megan, Joel, Caitlin, Rachel, Isaac, Annie, Rachel, Harrison, Emma, Chloe, Clark, Griffin, and Orion. Yeah, there were 2 Rachels in there. But the happy, hilarious family dynamic would change when Sybil received a heartbreaking diagnosis from her doctor. Sybil had Alzheimer's and her health began to deteriorate post-diagnosis. Not only that, but her family watched as the woman who had cared for them and made them laugh began to slip away. On February 2nd, 2019, just after 8 in the morning, she passed away after her years-long battle with the condition. With Sybil's passing came the required steps to honor a lost loved one. But some of the more traditional ways to say goodbye just didn't seem to suit the 81-year-old mother and grandmother. Namely, Sybil's kids felt a run-of-the-mill obituary simply wouldn't suit the woman that they'd lost. Brian told CBC, "We wanted to do something that kind of celebrated who she was and to give us an opportunity to basically have one last conversation with her and have some laughs at the same time." But it wasn't just the siblings saying goodbye, they had to get Ron on board too. By the time of Sybil's passing, Ron's life had changed in more ways than one. One of his friends, Dorothy, had stepped in to take care of the ailing former nurse, someone who claimed to know the Hicks family when they took to the social media website Reddit to explain how Dorothy and Ron had grown so close as Sybil's condition had worsened. The Reddit user described it as just one human comforting another during an undoubtedly difficult time. Presumably, someone as straightforward as Sybil would have included the news of her husband's new partnership in her obituary. That meant Brian and his siblings had to get Ron on board with such an inclusion too. To seal the deal, Sybil's kids penned the obituary first and then shared it with Ron over the phone. After reading it though, the Hicks kids heard nothing on the other end of the line. But then they realized that Ron wasn't silent out of anger, he was just laughing too hard at what they'd written. Brian says he just felt so comfortable with the way that we presented the idea, and he just said, "Carry on, and I hope the service is just as fun to celebrate your mother's life." But as we shall see, Sybil's family weren't the only people to go down the comical route with their loved ones' obituaries. 63-year-old Tom Schrant's obituary hit all the same notes as Sybil's. His sister Pam Capriva Barnes told City Pages in 2019 that she found most printed goodbyes to be too formulaic and boring. As she put it, you might as well go to the courthouse. So after her one-of-a-kind brother lost his battle with cancer, she knew she had to break the mold. In the first line of her brother's obituary, Pam made it clear that she hadn't written the typical goodbye. Instead, according to City Pages, she began, "Tom Schrant, Leonard, made his last inappropriate comment on March 29, 2019. If you're wondering if you've ever met him, you didn't, because you would remember. For those of you who did meet him, we apologize, and we're sure he probably offended you. He was world-renowned for not holding back and telling it like it is." Pam then backtracked to the beginning of her brother's life. Tim's June 11, 1955 birthday came 100 years too late, Pam continued. Given Tim's demeanor, he would have been the perfect weathered cowboy in the Old West or rough and tough pioneer, or maybe he just should have been Amish. Tim's affinity for his freedom proves to be a running theme in his obituary. Pam wrote that his fondness for his own authority followed him to South Winneshiek High School in Kalmar and later into the Army. This provided for many interesting episodes and stories, detentions and demotions, and a few run-ins with the law, not just locally but globally. Pam also noted that her brother left behind a hell of a lot of stuff that his family doesn't know what to do with. Apparently, she even offered up Tim's Virgin Mary in a bathroom shrine to interested obituary readers. His sister then spoke about his closest family members, including his two beloved sons and granddaughters who he had taught to cuss. Of course, Tim's family would miss his outspoken character, one that drew people to him. According to City Pages, Pam then explained, his family wanted to hang out near him because you just knew he was going to say or do something good. It's not that he was such a great storyteller, it's that he was the story. Clearly, Tim's ability to tell a good tale appeared to run in the family. As soon as the obituary was published, news outlets picked it up, and it went viral across Facebook too. And the newspaper added that some readers even deemed it to be possibly the best obituary ever written. Meanwhile, Sybil Hicks' goodbye had the same effect on readers after its publication, and it quickly racked up thousands of shares on social media. And that's because her children, much like Tim Schrant's sister Pam, hadn't held back. Instead, they delivered their mother's goodbye as if she had written it herself, packed with her signature wit. According to the Hamilton Spectator, Sybil's obituary began, "It hurts me to admit it, but I, Mrs. Ron Hicks from Baysville, have passed away." Right off the bat, her kids started with one of their mother's signature statements. As we previously mentioned, she referred to herself as Mrs. Ron Hicks when she wanted to make an emphatic point. Next, the obituary described Sybil's passing, also from her point of view. It continued, "I passed peacefully with my eldest daughter Brenda by my side." Soon enough, though, the tone reverted back to Sybil's normal vibe. She narrated, "I leave behind my loving husband, Ron Hicks, who I often affectionately referred to as a horse's ass." Next, Sybil's obituary covered the children whom she tolerated over the years, and it's no surprise that she describes each one in honest detail. The obituary began starting with her eldest son, Bob, her favorite. The second-born, Brian, was the Oreo cookie favorite, and the latter description required some clarification for the cookie lover himself. Brian explained to CBC, "My sisters kept claiming that I took all the Oreo cookies out of the bag and then pretended I never got one so my mother would buy me a bag just for myself. They were always teasing me." As such, he became the Oreo cookie favorite in the obituary. And the youngest three siblings got their own monikers too. Sybil's oldest daughter, Brenda, was remembered as running to clean the bathrooms when she heard company was coming. Next came Barbara, who the obituary described as the ever Miss Perfect. Lastly, Sybil said goodbye to baby Bruce, who wouldn't eat homemade turkey soup because he didn't want to be alert looking for bones while he ate. On a more touching note, Sybil's first-person obituary then said that she'd miss seeing her sweetest grandchildren grow up to be the incredible people they're meant to be. She then went on to recall the incredible life that had led her to becoming a grandmother, starting with the shiny, bright saddle shoes that she'd worn to her high school graduation. Sybil's obituary then touched on her nursing training and career, as well as her and Ron's bus company in Baysville. It talked about her children, the 5 Bs, hopping into the car for a family move up north. It even mentioned the matriarch's love of horticulture, sewing, and the Lions Club. To close, Sybil's goodbye reverted back to her signature snark. In perhaps its most surprising moment, the obituary stated, "I finally have the smoking hot body I've always wanted, having been cremated." On that note, the first-person narrator then invited everyone who knew her to come bid her farewell. The obituary said, "Please say goodbye and celebrate my wonderful life with my husband and his special friend Dorothy, who is now lovingly taking care of my horse's ass." Then we discover who actually wrote Sybil's goodbye. The first-person narrator then claimed, "It wasn't my husband, it wasn't my oldest, nor was it my youngest." For her final send-off, Sybil became heartfelt yet again. She said, "Thank you all for sharing my life with me." And with that, the Hicks children delivered an obituary that would go viral across the internet. One Twitter user summed it up perfectly, writing, "Sybil Marie Hicks passed away this week at the age of 82, and man, did she go out swinging."